All right, guys, I am impressed. Wow, okay. That makes this X Elite 64% faster in this test. This is the first time ever that we have a laptop at a great price with great features that competes with the Mac and even beats it in multiple ways. Wow, good job Microsoft, good job Qualcomm. This thing is fantastic. I can genuinely recommend this to friends, to family. It's a killer machine. You will not be disappointed. One of the things I love about this Surface now that it's X Elite is we are not losing performance when we are on battery. All right, let's hit export here. I'm starting my timer, and out of the get-go, the X Elite might be going quicker here. I know the bar is larger, so let's see what happens. All right, guys, I am impressed. Wow, okay. So the M3 with 8 gigs took 1 minute and 53.95, basically 1 minute 54. The Surface with X Elite took 1 minute and 39. So even without graphics acceleration, just because the CPU is fast, we have 16 gigs of RAM, it beat out the M3 with 8 gigs. Now the M3 with 16 gigs is 1 minute and 3 seconds, so that does still win out. But the graphics here aren't that powerful anyway, so I guess that doesn't matter. I am just really shocked that even with emulation, this is not natively supported with ARM on Windows, it still did faster. That is crazy.
Apple fanboys, they are just admiring and excited with Windows laptops on ARM chips, on Snapdragon X Elite chips. They are just amazing.
All right, guys, we have our scores, and this is impressive. We have 550 points on the M3 Air. Of course, it does thermal throttle, but the X Elite Surface got 841. That is a difference of 53%. So even though the clock speeds ran low, the performance is here. If we take a look at the M3 MacBook Pro that has a fan, that scored 633. So the X Elite still smokes it. That is very impressive in terms of performance. So overall, does the new X Elite beat out the Mac? Well, in a lot of ways it did. In a lot of ways, more ways than we've ever seen before. And even in the test that it lost, other than some of those graphics, it wasn't by much. And overall, this is one impressive machine. For $13.99, 512, 16 gigs to get great battery life, to have a nice screen other than the reflectivity, nice keyboard, trackpad, nice speakers. It's nice. It's very impressive. And just using it day to day, just the snappiness, the responsiveness. I've never felt a Windows laptop that was so snappy and responsive. So if you're looking for a laptop that's Windows based, and you're using email, web applications, general programs, even if it's not yet fully optimized for ARM on Windows, this is the first time ever that we have a laptop at a great price with great features that competes with the Mac and even beats it in multiple ways. Wow, good job Microsoft, good job Qualcomm. This thing is fantastic. I can genuinely recommend this to friends, to family. It's a killer machine. You will not be disappointed yet with what most people are buying. And here are the full results. As far as the read speeds, the Surface is over 30% faster. The write speeds, it's faster, but not by a whole ton. And even if we got the 512 on the Mac, the read speeds on the Surface would still be quicker. And now I have Geekbench 6 opened up right here. Of course, we have the M3 that's an 8-core processor compared to a 12-core here. But let's go ahead and run our CPU benchmark. Now, one of the things I love about this Surface now that it's X Elite is we are not losing performance when we are on battery. Maybe a slight difference in single core, but it doesn't matter compared to the previous Intel versions. And here we go, we have the results. And of course in single core, the M3 is so fast. We are looking at about 20% faster. And in terms of multi-core, the X Elite Surface is about 17% faster. 14,088 is a killer score. And remember, we are getting this performance on battery. It doesn't matter if you're plugging it in, you're still getting over 14,000, which is killer. And now I have speedometer 3.0 running. This tests the overall web application performance and the general web speed. And look at this, guys. We have 30.5 compared to 29. That is a 5% performance difference. This is the closest that a Windows laptop has ever gotten to a Mac with the same generation machines. And just using this laptop here, unzipping files, opening up settings, just using it as a laptop, this is the fastest, quickest experience I've ever had in Windows. Extremely snappy, so quick, and it just makes me happy how responsive and nice it is to use it while we've been using it. I mean, this thing is super impressive. And now I have Figma opened up on both with this high resolution, high quality project brought to us by 500 Designs, one of the best design studios in California. And here we have a lot of high resolution layers. I'm gonna start out by just zooming in here and seeing how responsive it is and how quick it is to load these high resolution graphics. So zooming in, everything's loading up really quick. Of course, we have the M3 here, which has really good performance. Let's go in here. Let's zoom in here. All right, waiting a little bit to load this. Bam, it's loaded up. And let's test this out on the Surface. I'm gonna go to the same spot here. Nice and smooth zooming in. Bam, right there. So I think just as quick as the Mac, maybe even quicker. And now I have 12 high resolution layers here opened up. We're gonna go ahead and export these. All right, guys, we have our results, and the M3 takes 1 minute 36 seconds compared to 1 minute and 53 for the X Elite. So the M3 is about 15% faster. And I guess that kind of lines up with our single core performance. So M3 is still quicker than the X Elite, but this is not slow by any means. And now I have Cinebench opened up right here. We are gonna do the 10-minute test because we know that the MacBook does not have a fan, whereas the Surface has 2 of them. And we have a couple programs here. We have the ARM64 version of Hardware Monitor, so we're gonna give you guys a lot of info we couldn't previously. Let's go ahead and start on this 10-minute stress test. And taking a look at the frequencies here, overall, the highest that I am seeing was 3.4. I'm seeing 3.2 right over here, so it's not clocking super high. The highest we saw was 4 gigahertz, but that is not staying for full CPU load. Now on the Mac, we're running at 3.5 flat, and you can see that we're already at 106 degrees as far as the temperature. That's the average of the core. So this thing is getting hot. Now with the X Elite, I'm seeing 87, 89 over here on these CPU sensors. And the max was 96, but I can hear the fan, barely can hear the fan, but obviously it's working to keep this chip nice and cool. We're looking at about 85, 87 compared to 103 average right now. So nice and cool, and surprisingly, very quiet. And hold on a second, this is weird. So far we've ran for almost 3 minutes, and we are getting chip throttling running at 2.5 gigahertz across the board, even though we're in the best performance mode. So even though it's running cool, it dropped those clock speeds. I don't know why that's happening. Maybe it's just to make sure your battery life still stays pretty good, but we have all those cores, whereas on the Mac, we're throttling because of heat and nothing else, but it's running at 3 gigahertz, so it's running faster clock speeds. Now, another interesting thing about the X Elite is that we have 12 performance cores here compared to 4. There are no efficiency cores, and this is actually designed to be a server chip originally, and they brought it down for a laptop, so it could just be that this chip needs a lot more wattage if you're running a full load across the system at high frequencies, but we don't want this thing to get crazy hot, crazy loud, and kill the battery, so that might be why all these are pretty much underclocked at this full full load. Now, of course, the Mac is going to keep slowing down, and we will see ultimately what the final performance is, because that's what actually matters. And now I have my thermal camera here. This is the M3 MacBook Air. We're seeing 43 degrees Celsius at the hottest point with that huge hot spot. And on this one, oh my goodness, 47 degrees Celsius. But you guys see the heat is being spread out over here. That's probably where the fan is. I thought this thing had dual fans, but we're seeing that spread over here. So possibly only has one, but it's interesting that it's so much hotter, 46 compared to 42 now on the fanless MacBook Air. Look at this, guys, 2.2. It actually dropped all the clocks there. I've seen it happen a couple times and they'll go back up right there, 2.189. That is so interesting because it has a fan and it's just not going very high as far as clock speeds. Now, this is also interesting. Look at our task manager. We're only using 73% of the total CPU capacity here, whereas with every other system we've tested, you're maxed out at 100%. So it could just be because you already can't feed it enough power to get the right clock speeds. They're running at lower clock speeds, and we're not maxing out the CPU, even though technically it could do that. That is just odd. Looking at the Mac here, we're only running at 9 watts on the CPU. I believe this is running at 23 watts for the Max. Could be slightly lower now, but it does use a lot more power. And I think because they limited it to that 23 watts, no higher, that's why this could be happening. This chip technically can go up to 80 if you have crazy cooling, but they probably put in that hard cap to give you that great battery life. All right, guys, we have our scores, and this is impressive. We have 550 points on the M3 Air. Of course, it does thermal throttle, but the X Elite Surface got 841. That is a difference of 53%. So even though the clock speeds ran low, the performance is here. If we take a look at the M3 MacBook Pro that has a fan, that scored 633. So the X Elite still smokes it. That is very impressive in terms of performance. But what about the graphics performance? So here I have 3D Mark opened up. We're gonna test Wildlife Extreme, the unlimited mode, and then we are gonna test their brand new graphics test as well. All right, we have our results, and we have 41.9 FPS on the M3 compared to 38.32. So that is a difference of about 10%. But you have to remember, we have the base MacBook Air. This is a 9-core GPU, not the 10-core. The 10-core gets about 48. So that is definitely a difference in graphics performance. This is more on the level of the M2. And now let's go ahead and run the brand new test. This is the Steel Nomad Lite. We're running unlimited mode to make sure that it's fair with the different resolutions. And this is a non-ray traced test. But of course, the M3 does have ray tracing if you're gonna use that. All right, guys, wow. So this is a tougher test. This is new. We have 21.9 FPS on the Mac. Remember, this is the binned 9-core. Here we got 14.78. That's a difference of 48%. And people mentioned that the X Elite's optimized for a 3D Mark Wildlife that a lot of people run. And here we could see, because the difference went from 10% to 48%. So as far as graphics performance, that just is not great. And we cannot run Solar Bay, which will use ray tracing. So same thing with using Cinebench, the GPU test. You also cannot run that. Even though on other systems, you could use software ray tracing instead, it's just slower. This won't even let it run that. Maybe they don't want you to use a lot of extra power when it's just not supported. So that is very interesting. Now, when we compare a 16 gig model of the M3 chip to an X Elite that also is gonna be maybe a larger one, we'll do some other tests that could harness graphics a little bit more to see what our real world differences are. But so far, if you need good graphics performance, that is not a strength of the X Elite. And now let's do a test for creatives. I have Lightroom Classic opened up right here. And I also, with this test, want to see how emulation works, because a lot of these applications, like Lightroom Classic, they are not designed yet for Windows ARM. Adobe's working on it, and other companies are as well, but you could still run it right now, at least with this, running emulation. Premiere Pro does not work yet, but let's see what the performance is like. We know the storage is really fast. I'm gonna switch through these images here, which all have a bunch of effects added, and thankfully, it is very snappy with the X Elite. Beating out the Mac or tying it. Sometimes the Mac is slightly faster. I was thinking with emulation, we're gonna have some slowdowns. That is actually quite nice. Previously with the SQ3, it would be super slow. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. Nice and quick. A little bit behind the Mac, but really close. And now I'm gonna edit all 50 of these high resolution edited images, but first I went into our preferences here, and with the M3, we can use the GPU for full graphics acceleration, but with the X Elite, it is disabled because of an error. It's just not designed to use it. And so we saw on some Intel laptops, it would only get half acceleration. Here, it's not gonna use that at all. I'll also mention that because we only have 8 gigs of RAM on here compared to 16, the 8 gig model is a lot slower than the 16 gig M3 because of Apple's dumb choice just to not give it enough RAM. It's a major bottleneck, so this is gonna be interesting. All right, let's hit export here. I'm starting my timer, and out of the get-go, the X Elite might be going quicker here. I know the bar is larger, so let's see what happens. All right, guys, I am impressed. Wow, okay. So the M3 with 8 gigs took 1 minute and 53.95, basically 1 minute 54. The Surface with X Elite took 1 minute and 39. So even without graphics acceleration, just because the CPU is fast, we have 16 gigs of RAM, it beat out the M3 with 8 gigs. Now the M3 with 16 gigs is 1 minute and 3 seconds, so that does still win out. But the graphics here aren't that powerful anyway, so I guess that doesn't matter. I am just really shocked that even with emulation, this is not natively supported with ARM on Windows, it still did faster. That is crazy. Now, in our next test, when we have a 16 gig Mac, it'll be more even as far as the specs. We'll do some more real world creative tasks. We'll do some video editing as well, running DaVinci Resolve, which is designed for this. So make sure you guys are subscribed. But so far, this has been one impressive comparison. And now let's take a look at our battery life. After hours and hours of shooting, after all of these tests, getting stuff set up, looking at the Mac, we're at 50% battery. We only ran through half of it, which is very impressive. And with the X Elite, we are at 32%. So yes, that is lower. It obviously uses more power than this M3. But with that said, in our previous comparisons using Intel-based thin and light laptops, they literally would be almost dead, or we had multiple times where they died, were hit 5%. We had to plug them in before we were done with our testing. So to have 32%, now 31, it just dropped. After all of this, that is impressive. And then with that, the very little fan noise that we had, when it turns on, it's very, very quiet. In a room with sounds, you're probably not gonna notice it. That's also very impressive. So overall, does the new X Elite beat out the Mac? Well, in a lot of ways it did. In a lot of ways, more ways than we've ever seen before. And even in the test that it lost, other than some of those graphics, it wasn't by much. And overall, this is one impressive machine for $1399, 512, 16 gigs to get great battery life, to have a nice screen other than the reflectivity, nice keyboard trackpad, nice speakers. It's nice. It's very impressive. And just using it day to day, just the snappiness, the responsiveness. I've never felt a Windows laptop that was so snappy and responsive. So if you're looking for a laptop that's Windows based and you're using email, web applications, general programs, even if it's not yet fully optimized for ARM on Windows, this is the first time ever that we have a laptop at a great price with great features that competes with the Mac and even beats it in multiple ways. Wow, good job Microsoft, good job Qualcomm. This thing is fantastic. I can genuinely recommend this to friends, to family. It's a killer machine. You will not be disappointed.